Chapter 21, the third plague. Exodus chapter 8, verses 16 to 19. And the Lord said unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch out thy rod, and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod, and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. Then the magicians said unto Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. Exodus chapter 8, verses 16 to 19. The third plague, we are told, was of some small insect. The King James Version reads lice. The Hebrew word kinim, means small insects that fasten themselves to the body. It can mean gnats, as in Ecclesiasticus 10:11, an apocryphal work. It means maggots. Some read it as tick or fleas or mosquitoes. We cannot know its precise meaning, perhaps, but we do know its impact. For a proud and clean people, it was a humiliating and revolting plague. Its essential damage was to human pride. We have only to imagine a similar plague today to realize its impact. It struck all classes equally, and it was felt by all to be a polluting and degrading thing. This was more than an ordinary infestation. On one occasion in the last century, Sir Samuel Baker observed of Egypt, it seemed as if the very dust were turned into lice. Such infestations, however, tended to be local or regional. This plague was national and total. In this plague, Pharaoh is not warned in advance, but apparently the wise men of Egypt were, since they attempted to duplicate the work of Moses and Aaron. The infestation was universal. It affected man and beast alike. Grant said of this plague, Dust is frequently connected in Scripture with death, the dust of death, Psalm 22 verse 15. Dust unto dust was the original verdict which put on man the stamp of vanity. The book of Ecclesiastes shows us death as the great tormentor of man, levelling him with all his wisdom and his pride to the beast. Since Egypt was in process of being destroyed, this seems to be a valid comment. The land was no longer a hospitable place, nor was it their wealth. It was a source of judgment. The first two plagues fell on the Nile, this one on the sacred land of Egypt. Its fertile soil, normally its wealth, was now producing problems. The dust or dirt swarmed with this blight, and all were affected. God was humiliating Egypt and shattering its pride. Egypt was being defeated, humiliated and broken, not by great foreign armies, but by the invisible God using frogs and lice. As a result, there could be no consolation in defeat, only shame. Pharaoh's magicians attempted to duplicate this plague, but failed. They were unable to belittle the miraculous plague by duplicating it on the smallest scale. They recognized that they were confronted by a power beyond them. They told Pharaoh, This is the finger of God. Verse 19. They recognized that they were faced with a supernatural power. However, apart from warning Pharaoh of what they faced, these men made no attempt whatsoever to submit to God, Elohim. This was not unusual. We see it in Balaam and in men over the centuries to our time. In fact, most men now will not even go as far as these men did. That is, to acknowledge that they were confronted by God. It is easier for them to deny that God exists, to insist that He is dead, than for them to admit His power and presence. Their goal is life without God so that they may become their own gods, determining good and evil for themselves. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Their pride, however, brought on humiliation. The repulsive infestation meant that their clean and carefully groomed bodies were overrun with lice, ticks, or some like bug. Pharaoh was the priest of all the gods, of all the many forces Egypt revered. Since he could not give himself to this priestly function in all its details, he delegated his authority to the priests, who were purified for this function. The priest declared, as he performed his duties, "Now I am verily a priest. It was the king who sent me to see the God." The king, or ruler, was called Pharaoh, meaning the great house, just as centuries later the Turkish sultans were referred to as the Sublime Porte. Their significance was more than personal. They represented a holy function in government. They were the focal points of divinity and power. As such, they were the source of the land's fertility and power. For Pharaoh himself to be infested with some degrading vermin was a humiliating fact. The boundaries of power had been broken and violated by the God of Moses. This supposedly non-existent God of Moses was reducing Pharaoh to humiliation and to degrading frustrations. We cannot, at this distance, visualize the full humiliation of the priests of Egypt and of Pharaoh. Because of the divine character of the great house, Pharaoh was an absolute monarch. He ruled Egypt with total authority and power. The sun, the great central natural force, was a symbol of Pharaoh, and the title of every Pharaoh was Son of the Sun. Not until centuries later was a Pharaoh referred to in the Bible by his personal name, Shishak, in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 40, circa 926 BC. At times, Egyptian religion had been called pantheism, but while there is a germ of truth in this, it is too abstract a concept for Egypt's very realistic religion. In pantheism, everything is an abstract oneness. In Egyptian religion, the abstractness is replaced with a proliferation of realistic things which merge into one another. All men were interrelated and subordinate to Pharaoh, who was the divine human link between this world and the next. Because Egyptian salvation was a matter of man's works and of human efforts, there was an inescapable continuity between heaven and earth. As against this, Scripture declares that there is a radical discontinuity between God and man, between uncreated being and created being. Hence, salvation cannot be by works, but is by grace alone. What man does cannot control God. To shatter the doctrine of continuity was to destroy the Egyptian plan of salvation, the humiliation of Pharaoh, the fact that he, the divine human link between heaven and earth, was covered with lice, meant the humiliation of the Egyptian faith and its life. To acknowledge this supernatural power was, however, something neither Pharaoh nor his associates were ready to do.